Good enough? I was trying to think of multiple ways to introduce the message today and had several ideas, but suffice it to say that it is no secret for anyone who's ever ridden in a car with me that I have a tendency to exceed what, shall we say, the man-made, always lower than it needs to be, posted speed limit on any given road. And my lovely bride, who always is looking out for me, regularly reminds me about these posted speed limits with a warning that I need to slow down. And without question, my response tends to always be the same, which is typically, look, I'm not going any faster than the car in front of me, and as a general rule, I'm just running with traffic. I'm going with the flow. Turns out, I'm not the only minister with a proclivity for speed. Rick Rusaw, senior minister at LifeBridge Christian Church out in Longmont, Colorado, has a very similar problem as I do, only his problem has actually blossomed a bit to where he's had the opportunity to meet policemen all over the country. And what's even funnier is that when he gets pulled over, he was talking about all of the different excuses that you start talking about. You know, officer, well, you know, this is going on, I was distracted here, really wasn't paying attention. But then we always come back to the big one that we hope is going to get us out of the ticket. He was talking about the last time he got pulled over. He told the officer after he tried all the other things, didn't seem to be working, he said, well, you know, officer, just to tell you the truth, I was just going along with traffic. I was just going with the flow. To which the officer replied, quote, just going with the traffic can get you in a lot of trouble sometimes. Here's your ticket, end quote. And you know, sometimes going with the flow can indeed get us in a lot of trouble. And yet we become really good at that, you know? We try to keep up, don't we? With everything that's around us. And here we are, we're in this series talking about a topic that for me personally is a really difficult and challenging subject. We're talking about renewing, refreshing, reviving, resting. How do I do that? Because my personality, my wiring is to lean in, not to lean back. You need help? You know what? I'm your guy. My whole life has been about taking on more, doing more. It's not about pulling back. And even though I may never say it out loud, my lifestyle very clearly says, look, I'll rest when I'm dead. Which may be sooner than later if I don't make some radical changes in my life. So for the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about the importance of prioritizing rest. Because the Bible is very clear on this topic. God invites us, or actually should I say, God commands us to rest. And here's what I find interesting about this command. This was not a do as I say, not as I do kind of command that we as parents can kind of be famous for sometimes, right? God Himself rested. Open your Bibles, if you would, to Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2, we're going to take a look here at verse 2 and 3. It says, on the seventh day, God had finished His work of creation, so He rested from all His work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because it was the day when He rested from all His work of creation. When we get to the end of creation, God, the omnipotent one, the all-powerful, that's what omnipotent means all-powerful, the God of creation, the Lord of the universe, the one whom Isaiah says in chapter 40, do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary. That God rested. Why? Because as we follow through Scripture, there is this invitation for us to stop, to pull away from the things that are stressing us, the things that we're leaning into, the things that we stay so busy with. And understand, this is not just to get a 5-minute breather from those things. The idea here is to refresh and renew, to refuel and revive through God. The Jewish Midrash says that on the seventh day, God created rest. He invites us to rest. He instructs us to rest. In fact, He goes so far as to insist that we rest. In other words, we really need to be leaning into this principle. Now, the Hebrew word for rest, as I mentioned 2 weeks ago, is not talking about being tired, burdened, or weary, or worn down. The word means means to stop striving or desist. It means to stop what you're doing, to quit pushing, quit leaning in. The Jewish Sabbath was born out of this idea of ceasing or stop striving. Remember when we looked 2 weeks ago, right in the middle of the Ten Commandments that we get from God, here's what it says in Exodus chapter 20, verse 8. God instructs us, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, not your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your town, for 6 days. In 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that's in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. And I like what God is doing here. God is doing more than just saying, hey, this is a chance for you to refuel and take a break so that you're not quite so worn out all the time. He's telling us that there's something holy about resting. But we're not wired to do that very well, are we? And I want you to let that sink in for a minute. When was the last time you thought that there was something holy about resting? This was a new presentation. When I heard that the first time, it's like, wow. You know, I really never saw it. I really never looked at it like that. And I know we're not wired to do that very well. The Sabbath day was to be a day that was set aside. Set aside. Today, the Jews call it the Shabbat. It goes from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. They measure their day from sundown to sundown. And during that time, they're not to do any work on Shabbat, on the Sabbath day. Now, we talked about this. We're not under the law today. However, the principle is still one that's very applicable to our lives. And it's just as important for us to incorporate as all the rest that we talked about. Of course, we know that Jesus came to fulfill the law. And in so doing, he challenges us to take it even further in our hearts and lives. This is what Jesus said about the Sabbath. It says in Mark chapter 2, that he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is to be a blessing. It is not to be a burden. It's a day to be set aside as a special, important day. It's not a day to be ignored and disregarded. It's a day to refresh. It's a day to renew. It's a day to revive. Now, when Jesus was speaking those words, he's talking into a culture and a society where the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the day, they had taken the Sabbath day and they had turned it into something that had become burdensome. They took a single command to remember the Sabbath day, to keep that day holy, one command, and they turned it into hundreds and hundreds of ways that you were to keep the Sabbath. They went to great lengths to define what work is in a lot of different ways, such that it actually became more work not to work on the Sabbath day. You had to work really, really hard at it. Let me give you an example. One of the ways they defined work is this. If you walked more than a quarter mile from your home on the Sabbath day, that was considered to be work. And so if for some reason or another you knew ahead of time that you were going to have to be somewhere on the Sabbath day that was more than a quarter mile away, then what they would do is the day before, they would go and they would walk a quarter of a mile, and then they would place a piece of furniture or something from their home, a table, a stool, something like that. They would place it right there. Then they would go another quarter of a mile, and then they might set a pot or a utensil or something from their kitchen. They'd set it there. Then they go another quarter mile, and they set something from their barn or whatever. And that way, what they could do is they could walk on the Sabbath day from home to home to home. I mean, you just think about the amount of work that you're going to, and just to abide by these burdens that the Pharisees were putting on the people at that time. It was ridiculous. It was crazy. Just so the Pharisees wouldn't think that you were working. When Jesus spoke these words, he's speaking them in response to these Pharisees, these religious leaders. And remember, these are the ones who are supposed to be helping people stay connected with God. And yet they're creating such a burdensome methodology that people are actually disconnecting from God. And one day, these Pharisees, they see Jesus and his disciples. They're walking along on the Sabbath day, and one of his disciples happened to grab some wheat from the field they were walking through, got some grain, and put it in his hands and rubbed it together to kind of separate the grain from the chaff, and he proceeded to eat it. And the Pharisees like, oh, look at what they're doing. They're harvesting on the Sabbath day. They can't possibly be from God. This can't be from God. Look at what they're doing. And Jesus, right there in Greek, he says, guys, you're messed up. Doesn't really say it in Greek, but that's the feeling that you get here. Is he's looking them in the face. He's saying, you guys are clueless. You have so messed this up. You have taken what God the Father had intended to be refreshment, what he intended to be a reviver, and you've made it burdensome. You've taken that which was good and you've made it bad. You've taken that which was supposed to be freeing and renewing and you've made it a trap. Jesus understood our need for rest. He was not blasting the Sabbath. He was saying the Sabbath was made for us, not us being made for some kind of enslavement to the Sabbath. If it becomes more work to try to keep the Sabbath, we've missed the point, haven't we? Earlier in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus was wanting to reconnect with the Father. He writes in Mark chapter 1, very early in the morning while it was still dark, Jesus got up, he left the house, and he went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Early, it says, Jesus pulls away from his work and he prays. He reconnects with the Father. In Mark chapter 6, verse 31, then because so many people were coming and going that they didn't even have a chance to eat, he said to his disciples who had been working really hard, he says to them, hey, fellas, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. The theology of rest is rooted in the Scripture where it's more than just breaking or ceasing some wearisome labor. It's also about reconnecting and refueling. It is about restoring our hearts with God. Refresh, renew, revive. Unfortunately, you and I live in a culture that tends to see rest as laziness. I mean, if you need a break, it's just because you're not strong enough, or you just must not be capable enough. If you need to pull back and step away, well, you just must be kind of lazy. So let's just test our attitude on this kind of thing real quick. Let's take a quick quiz. Suppose that you are walking out of church, one door or the other, and you ask somebody as you're walking out the door, hey, how you doing? And they look at you and they say, you know what? I'm doing great. I am so well rested. What is your immediate thought? Must be nice to not have any responsibilities. Must be nice to sit around all day and lollygag. Must be nice not to have anything important to do. Must be nice to be lazy. And that's kind of what goes on in our head, isn't it? Oh, well, if you've got time to rest, I mean, and truthfully, I don't even know if I've ever heard anybody say that before. But if we're honest with ourselves, what we think is that when they've got plenty of time to do well rested, they must be a slacker. You must just be lazy and unmotivated. Otherwise, you'd be tired and exhausted just like the rest of us, right? Because you're going with the flow. Fill these in for me. The early bird gets the worm. Yeah. If you get up, you get going, you work hard, you're going to be successful. No rest for the weary. Yes. That's where I tend to live most of the time. How about this one? Benjamin Franklin. Early to bed, early to rise, makes a man wealthy and wise. Yes. Carl Sandburg, an American poet, writer, and editor, said this: early to bed, early to rise, and you never meet any prominent people. that might be true, but we've lived for a long time with this idea that somehow our lives would get simpler, that they would be better if we could just learn more, if we could be wiser, smarter, and technology was really supposed to help with this. At one time, it was thought that technology was going to help us out so much that we were actually going to get to the point where we could drop our work week back to a 10 or a 20-hour week. Things like going to school and working from home, all that kind of stuff, all that would be a breeze. There wouldn't be any issues with that because technology was just going to make our lives so much easier. I work in the technology field, and I can tell you from firsthand experience that technology has done more to consume our time and steal our rest than any of us would ever like to admit. Think about it. While technology has made some things easier and simpler, it has at the same time put us in a position of doing more with less. We don't work less hours because of technology. We actually work more hours, don't we? Especially now that we can take our work with us wherever we're at. I can do my job from anywhere in the world as long as I have a laptop and an internet connection. 24/7, 365, I can do my job. And the problem with that is that becomes the expectation with modernization and technological innovation of today. Which is why, you want to know why Bill and I go so far out and so deep into the wilderness when we're on our wilderness trips? Technology can't reach us there, right? We are truly off the grid. There is no grid out there, right? We hope it stays that way. That's why we go out there, to get away. I can remember a day, you don't even have to think back too terribly far for this, not too many years back. Tell me if this isn't true. There was a day when you would not dare pick up your old school telephone and call someone else after 9 o'clock at night. You just didn't do it, right? You're putting the kids to bed, there's a lot going on. Unless it's an emergency, you didn't call anybody on their phone at 9 o'clock at night. But now, with the invention of these bother me anytime, anywhere smart devices that we have that we're all carrying around that we never let out of our hands or our possession, now people will not hesitate to send you a text message all the way up to and sometimes after midnight, right? Here they come, ding, 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 right? And there, and here you are. It used to be a time where, when it was time to get ready for bed, you might want to wind down a little bit, so you get into bed, and then you pick up a book, and you start to read a little bit, and you fall asleep as you read your book, and eventually you roll over and turn the light off. Well, now what's going on before we go to bed? We've got these devices, right? And what are we doing? Well, we're updating our Facebooks and our posts and our tweets and all the things in our Instagrams, all that we've done during the day, letting everybody else know what we've done today. But then we've got to check on what everybody else did during the day, right? So now we're checking those, and oh, by the way, while we're doing that, the ding, 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 ding from the text messages are flying in. 4 or 5 different conversations, all going on at the same time, and the time gets later and later and later as the technology robs us from our rest. All of this at the cost of our own sleep. We have made ourselves available 24/7, 365. We are never on pause. And I've been guilty of this. You tell me this ever happened to you. Someone sends me a YouTube clip, looks kind of interesting. It's late. It's only a 2-minute clip. I'll just watch that real quick, right? Click. Watch that 2-minute clip. But then it happens. That giant vacuum that sucks you in. Right? Because as soon as you watch that clip, there's a suggestion for 7 more. And it's like, let me just click on this one. And then, that leads to that one, which leads to that one, which leads to that one. And before you know it, I look at the clock, it's 2 a.m. Remember, folks, I get up at 5 a.m., which means I get 3 hours before I got to get up again, right? Isn't it any wonder that we're so tired? It happens. Left unchecked and unguarded, technology will steal our time and rob our rest if we let it. Our lives just continue to fill up with all this stuff that's going on around us. So things get more hectic, we get more tired, and we are running ragged. Are any of you resting? Rick Rusaw, who I mentioned earlier, says that there are basically 5 spheres or tanks or pools in our life. We've got the spiritual, the physical, the emotional, the intellectual, the social. And as we go about life, there are things that will fill these pools, and there are things that will drain these pools. And if I'm not paying attention to the things that are draining them, if I'm not looking at what's actually replenishing those pools, then when they drain down, I get to a place where I'm maxed out, where I'm stressed, where I'm overwhelmed, a short fuse, all those kinds of things that create anxiety and add more burden to my life. And here's another thing. Even if I do a pretty good job of keeping 3 or 4 of those in balance, if I'm paying attention to them, making sure there's enough filling in as the draining is going out, if just one of those pools is somehow allowed to drain out, I'll end up being tired or stressed or worn down. We live in a culture that never stops. And it is saying to us every day, more. And it is so easy to buy into that because we find our value, we find our worth in being busy. I get affirmed by how busy I am, by how needed I am, by how active I can be. Well, Rick did a great illustration, I think really helps us to kind of see the mess that we've allowed ourselves to get into. And so I just wanted to kind of give you a visual a little bit of what we're actually dealing with on a daily basis. And so I want you just to imagine, if you would, that this glass represents your life. This is your life, right? And so if we have our life, what do we do with our life? Well, we tend to fill our lives up, don't we? And so we have our day-to-day chores that we have to do, and oh, by the way, we need to go and have our work life, and then, well, you know, there's the social things that we have to do, and of course we can't forget our family. You know, we got to have some family time in there, and then even with family time, it's important that everybody has some hobbies, right? And so what happens is we just keep pouring, and before long we look down and we're like, oh my goodness, I got a mess, right? Because we just keep pouring in there. And then what happens? Just the smallest thing, just a little bump along the road, and stuff spills out, doesn't it? The mess makes a bigger mess. But never worry, because as soon as we have a little room, what are we going to do? We're just going to start pouring it in there again and again and again. Right? We will fill it up. We will make a mess of our lives because we don't know when to stop and just put it down and say, enough is enough. My schedule is full. My priorities are set. There's only so much that I can do. And oh, by the way, God understands that, which is why He set aside this principle of rest. You and I need the rest. Friends, when your bucket gets full, it doesn't take much to jostle the bucket and stuff to start spilling it out. We pack our lives, and we pack our lives, and then the smallest things will stress us out. We get angry, we get frustrated, we get worn out, we get burdened, we get stuck. But it doesn't need to be that way. Because God is inviting us to something different than that. Finding space in our lives, creating margin in our lives. This whole biblical idea of rest was to rest in God. And that's the one thing that I want to make sure that we really begin to understand here. Is that I know that I can tell every one of you, look, you need to go home this afternoon, you need to take a nap. And a nap would probably help you. I know it helped me. Briefly. God is doing more than saying, look, take a nap. What He's saying is, I want you to rest in me. Create some margin in your lives for me. Psalm 46, verse 10, shows us that real rest is anchored in God. Cease striving. The psalmist says, be still and know that I am God. Find the stillness. Find the rest in God. Augustine was a 4th century theologian. He said this, quote, our hearts are restless until they rest in you. Now here is what our lack of rest is really saying about us. And this is hard. Because when I say these things, you got to understand, I'm not looking at you. I'm standing in front of a mirror that's about the size of this room, right? Here's what our lack of rest really says about us. When I don't rest, here's what it says about me. When I'm not pulling back, when I'm leaning in all the time, I'm pouring until it's spilling over, here is what I'm saying. God, I don't really trust you. And I don't really need you. When I get stuck, when I'm in over my head, when I'm drowning, then I'll need you. But for now, I got it under control. Until then, I'm going to fix this problem. I'm going to lean into this issue. I'm the one that needs to be engaged here. I'm the one that needs to take on more than I should take on. I'm the one that needs to stay busy. I'm the one that's active. I'm the one that's got this under control. Well, if you were to go back to the beginning of Psalm 46, it starts out this way. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear. Though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. The psalmist is saying, look folks, the world is on fire. It is in trouble. The mountains are shaking. The seas are raging. There's trouble all around us. And in all of that, in the midst of that chaos, in all of that uncertainty, all of that disruption to our lives, the psalmist says, just be still. Just be still and know that I am God. You see, friends, it is not your job to fix the mountains. It is not my job to calm the sea. It is not our job to resolve every problem. That doesn't mean that we don't work. That doesn't mean that we don't labor. It doesn't mean that we're not leaning into issues. What it does mean is that we recognize that it is essential to our health and well-being, physically and spiritually, to take a step back from our crazy busy lives and rest and refresh and connect with God. It is not wrong to get tired. It is wrong to stay tired. Because God has made a provision for all of us to rest, to revive, to refresh, to renew in Him. And if we just keep running where our lives are filled to the max all the time, you know what's going to happen? We're going to end up in trouble. Remember, Jesus came not to abolish the law. Jesus came to fulfill the law. And you've heard the words that He said. We read them last week. Matthew 11, verse 28. When Jesus said, come to me. When you're struggling, you're overburdened, when you don't know how things are going to happen, when the chaos, when the mountains are quaking and the seas are raging and there's uncertainty everywhere and your life is just so full that it's spilling over. Jesus says, come to me. All of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest, refreshment, reviving, renewal, refueling. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. It's more than just a Jesus is inviting you and he's inviting me to connect our lives to him. To live in this rhythm where we work hard and we lean in and we also rest. We cease, we stop striving. Not just a nap, not just a long weekend, but a conscientious, on purpose, prioritized weekly rest. When you and I run all the time, eventually we'll have nothing left to give. And we're saying to God, I don't need you. I've got this. Until all of a sudden, we don't. Wendell, I don't know if you saw it, but Wendell was spot on. When all of a sudden, right, it blows. It blows. There are some familiar words in Psalm 23. The psalmist says that the Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. What is it right now in your life that you can be letting go of to help you get some rest? I've caught myself too many times saying, you know what? There's just no way I can rest. I mean, have you seen my schedule? I've got obligations. I've got bills. I've got things I've got to do. I've got people that are counting on me. I've got things that I promised. I've said I would do this. Integrity says that I've got to fulfill this. I can't rest. I don't have time to rest. You want to know the truth of that matter? Semantics. I'm not using my words correctly. See, the truth of this matter is that while I'm saying I can't, what I really mean is I can't rest, Lord. I won't rest. I won't rest because I find value in being busy. I find value in being needed. I found value in doing something, accomplishing stuff. I find value in making sure that my life is full. And in the midst of that, anybody there? Anybody know what I'm talking about here? Amen. Thank you, Bill. In the midst of that, Jesus says, come to me. Do not miss that. You want to go home and take a nap this afternoon? I encourage you. I'd love to join you. More than that, though. What is Jesus saying the ultimate rest comes from? Coming to Him. Which is why, when God said, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, it brings this connection back to God. Stop the chaos. Be still. Come to me, Jesus says. Come to me and rest. Will you? Will you come to Him? Will you come to the one who gave His life on the cross to remove the burden of sin from your life? Will you come to the one who rose from the dead to give us a new life? Will you rest in God on a regular basis and allow Him to refresh and renew and revive your spirit? I hope so. I challenge you to. And I assure you, you will not be disappointed. Let's pray. Father, I know how difficult this whole idea is because it is so countercultural. It is so just opposite of what we are dealing with in our society today. This constant, always on, never on pause, pressure, 24/7, 365. We just never seem to be able to stop. Lord, as we've learned here, it's not because we can't. It's simply because we choose not to. We won't. Maybe, Lord, as we confront the reality of that, you would convict us of our sin in this. And Lord, we would surrender it to you. And Lord, we would begin to rest in you. We would begin to take that time to be still and know that you are God. Lord Jesus, we come. We come to you. We come to you for rest. Help us to really do that. Lord, set our souls at ease as we trust in you. This is our prayer today. In Jesus' name.